I'm the bug with the butter on it, and you are probably wondering why I have tied you to this chair. Nope, don't talk, I'll explain everything. Well, you may know that I released a film a little while ago, and I just thought I'd show you some behind the scenes stuff and just, how I did things. Don't worry, I'll let you free into the abyss at the end. I know there's plenty of fun things to get up to out here, but anyways, let's get started, shall we? Hello, beautiful people. Thank you for joining me over here on the Patreon. To show my gratitude, I will return your family that I took hostage back from the void. You did good. I wanted to make this video because I've been getting a lot of questions about how I made certain scenes from straight to hell, and I kind of just wanted to share my creative process and thoughts on how I made different scenes so that you can take from it what you will. And I'm definitely not going to pretend to be an expert on what I do, but I have been at it for a handful of years, and there are certainly things I've learned along the way that I feel like are kind of worth sharing. This video will be fairly long because I'm essentially covering what was 4 months of work, but I will try and keep my rambling to a minimum and make everything as concise as I can. So one of the parts that made making this film so much easier than it would have otherwise been was a Discord group called the Helldivers Archive. It's basically a group where they upload a bunch of ripped 3D models straight from the game, and it made making the film a whole lot easier because no matter how much I hand model something, it won't be quite as close to the game as just getting it from the game. And of course, a lot of the models I adjusted myself to make them a bit more refined and detailed, but it saved so much time because making all of this by hand would have taken forever. So I got pretty much all of my sound effects from Artlist.io. I'm not sponsored by them or anything, but they really are just one of the most affordable sound libraries that are out there. And even though the sound effects are, for the most part, pretty mediocre, it still gives you just so much variety that you really can kind of overlay things and kind of mix your own sound effects from these. And I'll show you later kind of what that process looks like, but overall, Artlist was a huge help. And I also just want to say that prior to making this film, I have zero sound mixing or audio design experience. The most I've ever done was putting music over like some footage, but it just kind of goes to show how nice it was having this library of audio and just some of the few techniques that I did land on, how effective those were. So another website that I used when making this film was Blender Kit, and this is a resource I feel like people don't talk about nearly enough. Basically, it's kind of a sketch fab, but exclusively for Blender. So it's kind of nice because you can have shaders and materials that only really work in Blender. Like they're actually using the different nodes that Blender has. It isn't just like in Sketchfab where you download a PBR texture and it can only use the principal BSDF inputs. Like these, you can get some really interesting things on here. And the other really nice part is that all the licensing for every single thing on here is either royalty-free or CCO, meaning you can use these for any purpose at all. You don't even have to attribute the original creator. You can just drag and drop, and it's really, really simple. So yeah, I used it for a handful of just random small objects and shader effects that would be a pain in the ass for me to try and make. So the two things that really inspired me to make this film were Casey's Spill It All short film on YouTube and Oliver Daniels' recreation of the drop scene, and just in combination with how theatrical the video game itself actually was. Alright, so first up we have the ship warping scene, and the purpose of this was basically just to show that we're traveling to Super Earth, and the reason I didn't want to start there is because I wanted to try and connect this to events that happen in the game as much as I can, so people can be like, oh yeah, I remember that, or just, just tie into the game so people can relate to it more. And there was a point in the Helldivers game where, I can't remember exactly what was going on, but your ship automatically warped to Super Earth. It was like, we gotta get out of here, and then it brought you to Super Earth. So I tried to kind of bring that back for this to be like, oh, shit's going down, so your ship is taking control and you're going to Super Earth. And yeah, the smoke on the ship is just a simple Embergen smoke simulation where it's emitting from the ship itself. You could totally do this in Blender, but Embergen is real time, so I just quickly ran over to there and simulated it. And this entire warp is kind of based off of, or not kind of, it's pretty dang close to the warp effect test rendering Blender 2.81 Eevee by Mini Production. I just really liked how their warp looked, and it's kind of similar to how the ships warp already in Helldivers, where in Helldivers, like, it's just kind of a instant teleport. There's not really a lot of effects that go on, but this is kind of the same thing where they kind of just appear, but it has a bit more pizzazz to it. So I did the thing that they did where they kind of had a slight amount of anticipation where I had a literal just circle that's glowing off in the distance. And then the ship comes in, and it has a few lights on the front of it that have their shadows turned off so that they're not casting shadows, which kind of just makes it look like it's glowing from the front. And then the Earth over here I did make, but since it would be a pain in the ass to render every single frame, because obviously something like this is pretty intense, I just rendered it onto a good old plane, and it worked flawlessly because it's super far away from the camera, so it's not like it's going to parallax or anything anyway, so it just kind of exists there. And this is like the textures for the Earth and Moon. If you didn't know, NASA has extremely high resolution maps on their website. They even have like the height maps and stuff, so you can download from that from their website. Just put it on a sphere, and bing bang boom, you have an Earth, and then you throw like a extra sphere over it that just has a volume scatter node attached to it, and it automatically kind of gives you this, like sunny skies over here, but then you can tell there's like a sunset happening right there. So yeah, that's pretty nice. And for the sound effects for this, and just a heads up, I'll have the music muted for all this because it kind of just gets in the way, but the music is literally just straight from the game. It's the Cup of Liberty. Little did people know the kind of end of the song is like this somber, just kind of nice melodic piece, and then the Automaton theme song, and those are, I think, the only two songs I used in this entire thing. But for the sound effects, I kind of referenced the Elite Dangerous ship warp sound, where at the end of the warp it kind of sounds like the ship is creaking. So for the initial warp I used just the straight up sound from Helldivers of the ship going. Here, that's pretty rough. Here, let me so you can hear just the initial warp sound, and then I kind of just threw what's called a Brom on it, which it's this really handy sound effect, and it sounds like this. Kind of this just distorted, menacing sound where if you want something to sound big and kind of scary, it's really great to kind of, I use it a lot here. It kind of just adds extra depth to these sounds. And then to give it that kind of creaky sound, I notice that spaceships tend to have, and it sounds cool. They use it a lot in Elite Dangerous. It's literally just a wooden ship creaking sound effect. You can just look up like creaking sounds or wooden creaks or wooden ship creaks, and then we'll pull this up. And like, that sounds pretty cool. And also, when in doubt, down pitch things, because some of these things, it'll be kind of obvious what it sounds like if you play it normally. Like, that just doesn't sound quite menacing enough, but if you down pitch it, now you have something like this. And it just sounds a little bit bigger and more menacing, which obviously, since we're working with huge things here, it just kind of works better. This is the Stratagem selection scene, and the purpose of the scene originally, when I first made it, was to kind of show that he is picking some kind of heavy artillery weapons. Like, even though he's going down on the Super Earth, I feel like just having him pick the things that are kind of, I don't even know how to describe it, kind of just like the big guns, quite literally, kind of shows that shit is hitting the fan on the ground. And of course, later I decided to add the red Stratagem beam at the very end. And I thought it was cool because it kind of ties back to this moment where he's selecting the 500 kg, so it kind of implies that, he's using this at the end, and it kind of gives that whole sense of that he's like sacrificing himself, and that he's kind of just like, this all, like, everything is destroyed anyways, might as well just throw it down on myself kind of deal. So yeah, the inspiration, there really honestly wasn't any for this. I kind of just vibed it out. It just kind of seemed like what fit. Because I wanted everything at the beginning to kind of play out how it is in the game. You know, you get out of the cryopod, you walk up, you select your stratagems, and then you drop. So that's why I kind of wanted to do this at first, just kind of give more references back to the game itself. And then for the visuals, of course, this has like that RGB kind of screen effect to it, which is shamelessly stolen from Blender Kit. It is literally just an effect. And then I got the textures of the stratagems from the Helldivers archive, and I just plugged them into the input of the RGB effect, and I had them like appear at different times so that it looks like they're, you know, boom, 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 boom. And that's kind of it for the scene. And then the audio effects, of course, are literally just ripped from the game again. It's just the stratagem selection sounds, so there's really not much more to it there. I think this is also a good time to highlight the sheer like power that Davinci Resolve has, because this is what it would look like if it just came straight from Blender and I just threw it into the video, like nothing added. And then we come over to Davinci, and that looks a lot better. Like that's night and day difference. And I did that just by separating the stratagems into their own view layer, and then making the Helldiver his own view layer. And what that event like allowed me to do was, when I was compositing these two things together, let me see, am I able to separate these right now? Oh, okay. Yeah, you can kind of see there are two different view layers entirely, and what that allowed me to do is I was able to use like a TV screen effect on the stratagems, so that it kind of, and I like destroy them so it has this almost like screen look. Like you can see it's kind of curved. I don't really know how to describe it. And I added a lot of glow and like a prism blur effect, so you get that separation of colors as well. But I didn't want that to apply on the guy in the back because that would look weird. And I just wanted it to get that screen look, like it's a floating hologram, but it still kind of looks like very digitized. So on a side note, I wanted to kind of touch on this. I don't want to go super in depth onto this part because I feel like there's not anything crazy complex going on here. But it does show that I feel like just having these kind of smaller plot devices really does kind of elevate a film, because if it was really just him getting in the pod and launching down and all this crazy stuff happens and all that yada yada, it's like cool, great, but just adding small things like this I feel like really can add a bit more complexity and kind of make it feel like it is a world and you are just a person kind of observing what's going on, versus a film. You know, it's like its own, like things are happening regardless of you watching kind of feeling. And also I just feel like I really liked it when other YouTubers like Casey with his Spill It All kind of made it dramatic and almost kind of added a human aspect that isn't really seen in Helldivers, because obviously it's a very silly game. It pokes fun at a lot of things, but I kind of like just seeing it in a more dramatic light, because if you think about it, it is a really dark scenario. Like these Helldivers are barely trained, and then they're immediately put into cryo sleep, and then they're woken up just to get shot down onto a random planet where they'll probably die. And here I just kind of wanted to add a bit more human aspect to it, just by giving him like a factory, you know, paper or cookie cutter kind of medallion that just has his family kind of etched onto it. I think adding that just kind of, I mean, it's kind of a simple thing and maybe even a bit cliche, but I mean, it really is just, you know, it kind of gives him a bit more backstory. It kind of shows what he's fighting for. And now for the infamous eye scene. So this was actually, funny enough, one of the easiest scenes in the entire film to pull off. The purpose of it was, once again, just kind of, you know, kind of give life to the character, I guess. Because I mean, it really is kind of a cliche and simple thing to do, but you know, the eyes are the gateway to the soul. So having a moment where you can see the eyes, and for a character that's otherwise masked, can, if used correctly, kind of make them feel more human. Obviously, with other characters like Master Chief or Mandalorian, like you shouldn't. But I don't feel like Helldivers is serious enough. They don't place any emphasis on the mask, so having a moment where it is you're looking inside of it isn't really a big deal. So this scene is created using an asset from an add-on called HumeGen, and I got it on a insane sale on Humble Bundle, and it is, you can see it. I took the Helldivers model and just cut it to conserve on resources, and then threw the HumeGen model in there, and I used a noise texture, just throw some dirt on his face. And even though HumeGen definitely makes them pretty convincing like people, they don't hold up to close scrutiny. So that was one problem I encountered. So to combat that, I'm like, let me just make everything super high contrast. And I also, some of the inspiration for the scene was obviously Casey's Spill It All again. He had a very similar scene, and I really liked it, and I felt like it kind of felt natural to put it in here as well. But I tried to put my own little spin on it by having it be this extremely high contrast angled light and to be focused exclusively just on like one eye. The pupil even like dilates at the beginning. If you never noticed that, I thought that I was so cool adding that. And that's literally just a shape key put like on the eye itself. So I make one shape where the eye is not dilated, and then go into edit mode, create a new shape key, and then make his like the pupil itself smaller, and then just animate the transfer between the two. Then the light is just an area light that is really thin, set to just red, put at a very dramatic angle. You can even see when you look at him straight on, he does not look nearly as good. It kind of only worked when put at this angle. But yeah, I mean, kind of, it's cheap, but if something isn't quite working, texture-wise or model-wise, sometimes you really can adjust the lighting, can really elevate it and make it look a bit more believable. So just using dramatic lighting here helped a lot, I feel like. And the animation of the eyes blinking and stuff, that was just, I took a video of myself just kind of blinking and looking around a little bit, and I was like, oh yes, eyes dart, they don't like just move. So I animated the eyes darting instead of gradually moving, and blinking only lasts for like 4 frames max, because blinking is quick, and like just small things like that along with some camera shake. It really was a pretty surprisingly simple scene to pull off. And for the sounds here, I added just a sound of a guy breathing, a heartbeat sound, some alarms going off where I added a reverb onto it, and the sound of him breathing is sound of gasping, scared in a spacesuit. Just looking up gasping breaths on Artlist kind of led me to that. And then a bass drop, because you can never have too much bass in something as dramatic as this. And yeah, I don't really know exactly what made me do those things. It just kind of felt right. Adding the heartbeat to kind of show that his heart's beating out of his chest and that he's scared. Same for the breathing. He's just freaking out. He knows what's going to happen. And then the alarm and bass were kind of just to add more anxiety to the scene, to kind of make you feel how he's feeling and just anxious and knowing what's going to happen, and kind of adding his eyes closing to the end was supposed to be sort of him kind of accepting his fate, knowing fully what he's about to get himself into. Alright, now for the drop scene. So the purpose of this was obviously to get from point A to point B, but honestly, this was supposed to be the kind of big part of the film. Like, all the other stuff is almost to fluff up this. And this was actually the very first thing that I made. When I first started making this film, I initially just was kind of trying to remake the drop. So if you notice, like, this is almost a one-to-one creation at the beginning of the drop that actually happens in the game. So at first I was just kind of trying to do a recreation where, you know, it gets knocked around and then, you know, shit's going down. But then it kind of, you know, obviously turned to a much bigger thing when I realized that people kind of liked what I was doing. So let's start with the pod itself. The pod is made up of a few different cylinders, each kind of serving their own purpose. So you have the bottom. Oh, goodness. Okay, you have the bottom, like, fire, like, that sits right at the bottom of the pod. You have this, like, much more fire, like it actually looks like flames, that is being displaced with a displacement modifier as well, just kind of give it some jagged edges. And then I also threw some embers that are scrolling as well, and then just a volume to kind of make it look like there's actual volume being emitted from all this, or like smoke being thrown back. And all these were done with the exact same principle. Let me see if I go to the actual shader. It's kind of hard to tell what you're looking at maybe, but it is just scrolling noise textures. And there is a ton of videos online on like how to do those yourself. But essentially here I had a noise texture that is going into a gradient sphere. So imagine I draw a circle like right here, and I plug a noise with a mix factor into the mapping input so that I'm like, hey, that sphere, how about you like roughen up the edges a little bit? And that is what that's doing here. And then I make that noise texture constantly be scrolling upwards using a driver, which is just saying, hey, take the frame, divide it by this number so I get like the speed I want, and then that becomes the z-axis. So I'm telling it constantly move the noise texture up and use that to control the edges of that gradient. And basically, all in all, gives you that fire look. And you can use that scene gradient or another noise texture, and then, you know, mess with stuff to kind of get the colors you want, but to get the actual like fire look is mainly just that gradient with the noise texture plugged into the map, or like mixed with the mapping. And all of these are using that exact same like shader setup, just tightened to different points. So like if you see, if I pull this, you start to get more of like the fire look of the other things. So just, it's that same premise, and then you tighten them depending on how you want them to look. And yeah, you'll get different variants of fire. And all these circles I have around the pod are basically just different controllers. Let me see if I can get all these back. Yep. So like this one controls the entire pod. And then this one is the camera controller, which is not parented right now for whatever reason. I must have unparented it when I was messing with stuff. But basically, sometimes it was easier to, instead of having the camera like grabbing it and moving it to a different point, if I wanted it to just rotate around the pod, I could just parent it to that, and now like you can see it just rotates around that point. Whereas otherwise it would be kind of a pain in the ass to animate it, you know? I had it so the pod, you probably could have guessed this, but the pod itself is actually almost never moving. Everything else is just moving around it. There's an empty somewhere around here, it would be a pain in the ass to find, that's moving up using a driver. It might even be this one, let's see. No, it's moving up, it might be this one. Or that one, I don't really know. I'm really bad at keeping track of things, especially because this was supposed to be test footage at first, but then became the whole thing, so nothing was properly planned out, so everything's very jerry-rigged. But there's an empty that's constantly moving up, and I kind of just grabbed everything else and parented it to that so that everything is moving up at the right speed. Oh, hello. So, let's see. Pod gets hit. That is just a ship that I took from Helldiver's Archive, put on a curve and going across it. Gets thrown around a little bit. This part was pretty fun to make, but the explosion I do here is surprisingly done within Blender. This was not using Embergen. Let me see. And that was just because at this point in time I hadn't gotten Embergen yet, so I was just using good old Blender, and it worked pretty good for this. Blender struggles when it comes to detailed stuff and creating like negative forces. So like imagine if I had like a volume right here and I like smash a cube through it, it has trouble making those like making the smoke kind of curl up against the cube if it's flying through, whereas Embergen is really good at that, but I didn't need that here, so it worked out and I never had to remake it. So the only trick I really used with this that is worth mentioning that I haven't actually seen anyone else do is Blender sometimes, because the renders are very low detailed actually, especially when it comes to like fire and emissive stuff, you can kind of, when you're doing an explosion, add a Voronoi texture. And like, I don't know how to explain it, so I'm just going to show you. You'll see there is not actually fire coming from this smoke. It is a Voronoi texture that I plugged in, and it kind of gives it that, you know, just how explosions have that kind of look about them. It's literally just get Voronoi, distance to edge, plug it in and multiply against the color, and that's the emission instead of any actual fire happening. Just to give it more detail than the actual simulation would have otherwise had. And I think it looked pretty darn good. Continuing through, shoots the bullet, cracks this ship. Most are, I would say probably half of the explosions done in this film were a cutesy little PNG sequence that I rendered in a separate file in Cycles. And this one is literally just a stretched version of that one I was just holding. Because with PNG sequences, it's kind of nice because you can just stretch them and put them in a bunch of different areas and it doesn't bog down the scene too much. So to give the illusion, or not the illusion, but just to make it look like the bullet is punching through the ship, I just got that same thing, stretch it out that way, and then the ship was a lie the whole time. It was actually two pieces, but when it got hit, I just made one fly off. So that is how that was done. Then the fire on the eagle, of course, is just another scrolling noise texture. And when making this film, one of the things I absolutely wanted to have in during this drop sequence is I wanted it to, for one, be a one take, because it just felt right. And I feel like it would kind of just set it apart. And I also wanted the camera to be driven at all times, meaning I want there to always be something that's like the camera is looking at and it feels natural. It's like, oh yes, I'm looking at the pod, we're going down, oh shoot, look, big ship and it has a gun that's about to fire, let's look at that. And then it gets shot, and then, oh, let's follow the bullet, what did it hit? Oh, it hit that thing. And then okay, that's cool. And then, oh shit, like plane is flying down, we're following that. Like, something is always motivating the movement of the camera during this entire drop. So yeah, that was just something that I found to be really helpful in conveying, or not conveying, but to not give very awkward camera movements and to just kind of make it more visually interesting. So this was just a good old Embergen explosion imported into Blender. Nothing too crazy there. And then this explosion, which this was actually made in Blender. This thing was simulated entirely in Blender. And contrary to what everyone said, I actually wasn't referencing the Halo 2 like anniversary cutscene where it's going, like, it's kind of doing a very similar thing. I'm sure I had that in the back of my mind because I've played that game so many times when I was a kid. But I was actually not even really thinking about it. I was just like, what if ship gets shot through and he goes through? I don't know. It just felt kind of cool, but I'm sure in the back of my mind I was referencing it. But funny enough, I wasn't actually referencing it intentionally. But this is just, when I was simulating it, it was, I had a cube that was emitting a bunch of fire, and then I had a force field that suddenly would start going like negative, if that makes sense. So it starts, like, all the smoke and fire is allowed to explode at the beginning, but then I'm like, actually, let's go back in. And the force field starts sucking all the fire and smoke in. And because Blender tries to kill itself whenever you try and simulate smoke and stuff, this is actually a pretty not big smoke simulation. Like, even though there's this whole tunnel of fire going through the ship, it's actually the same, like, this animation, or this simulation, just played several times throughout the length of the ship. Just kind of conserve on resources when I was initially simulating. This ship is also a lie. Prior to getting shot, it is one ship. And then as soon as the bullet touches it, I swap it out with a model that has a hole in it. And then this lattice is just kind of bending the metal of the ship. You can't really see it, but trust. It just kind of makes it look like it got shot through. And then this is just a bunch of debris that I found online and just threw in there to kind of just make it look like twisted metal. And it kind of, like, it really did just kind of work once I threw all the pieces together. I really didn't adjust it that much. Just having the camera have so much motion blur and just crazy shit going on really did kind of sell that part. So for the sound effects of that whole section, really there wasn't many up until right here. And this is actually, like the cannon was the orbital laser taken straight from, or not the laser, the like the orbital cannon, just taken like straight from the game. And in addition, I just threw like an extra explosion sound, and it ended up sounding like this. And I'm going to turn the video track off so it plays smoother, but that is not smooth. So that one was pretty easy. Usually, what I like to do is layer sound effects because, like I said, Artlist, the sound effects are usually pretty simple. You kind of have to end up making a lot of your own, but layering a few different sound effects, even some that almost sound pretty similar. Like sometimes when I do an explosion, there'll be like 3 different explosions, but happening at different times, and I shift the like tone of it or had the pitch of it. Just doing that can kind of add a bit more depth and make the sound effects sound like something completely original. And then another thing that I like to utilize was at certain points throughout the film, I would delay the explosion sound. So let's see if I can get this to play back smooth right here. Or actually, I may move it back a little. So you could hear, like, you see the explosion and then you hear it. I only did this at certain points because sometimes I just didn't want to hold the camera on an explosion for a ton of time, so I didn't have, enough camera time to wait to hear the explosion, if that makes sense. But whenever I wanted to convince a sense of scale and distance, I would delay the explosion sound. So like here, the cannon is actually pretty far away, but I didn't care to convey that right then, or how big the ship was. I just wanted to convey the sheer force that the cannon has, so the sound was instant. Over here, though, I wanted to convey, like, it shot something far away, and they just cracked that ship in half, and that was a huge ship. I wanted to convey the dramaticism of it, so I delayed the sound. So doing some of that, like, purposeful sound delaying at different points really helped kind of convey the emotion I'm trying to convey. Here, the sounds are, once again, just a few different explosion sounds overlaid on top of each other. And these were not delayed because I wanted just you to feel the impact in the moment. So let me play without the video so you can hear it better. And like, just to hear some of the things that were like the different sound effects, I'll play some of them for you so you can kind of hear what I overlaid right then, because I feel like it's kind of an interesting feel to it. So there's one, and that sound was to kind of listen to it as it's like flying down and about to hit. Or not as it's about to hit, to kind of have like that distorted fall off of the explosion. Then there's this, which obviously is like the main grunge of the explosion. Then we got this, a bit more impact and like forward oomph on the explosion, I guess you could say. Then we have this. Oh, that's not what I meant to do. And honestly, I feel like that actually doesn't add much. It probably is just a sound effect that I forgot to take out because I feel like it's so quiet you wouldn't be able to hear it anyways. But let's see what this one is. And that was, again, to just add some more distortion. Sometimes it was nice just to look up on Artlist like distorted sounds or glitch effects and throwing them over different sounds to kind of make it have that more modern crunchy sound to it. And then here I just took some dramatic drum sounds from Artlist and threw them over. Oh, that did not work. Let me do it without the video. So actually, there's a lot going on there. But the drums were initially to kind of give it that trailer feel when I first made the Reddit post. But I ended up keeping it because it just sounded pretty, I don't know, it sounds really badass. I had the music kind of fall off, and then right before the final drum hit, I had the music come back for just a beat. Kind of make it sound like the music's getting like kicked out. I don't know if that makes sense. And then let's isolate all the sounds that are, isolate all the sounds that are happening when it's going through, because there is a lot going on there. And this thing I'm about to play is actually one of the first mixings, or one of the first, like, yeah, I guess you could say that, mixings I did for the film. First time I downloaded some sound effects from Artlist and started messing around with them. Here, let's turn that off. So there's a lot going on there. There's kind of a whip sound that happens right before the impact. Just to kind of, because I feel like when I initially put this trail there, you couldn't really tell that something was being shot. So adding kind of a whip sound makes it sound like makes you think that something just got shot there. Otherwise, it kind of just looks like it explodes. And then I added this, I think it's this sound effect. I don't even know what to call it, but it kind of just adds like tenseness to it. Let's turn that off again. Like, I don't even know what you would call that, but it definitely gives you some like anxiety, almost sounds like alarms. And then I added some fire, just because, you know, there's fire. And then kind of a, I don't know, like a horror, what is this? Yeah, something synth screech. I think I did just type in screech into Artlist when I was initially looking for that sound effect, because I want it to be like, I mean, this part, I just wanted it to be completely overwhelming. So to accomplish that, I just kind of put a bunch of sound effects, not most of them you would initially think of when you see something going through a ship, but just any sound I could do to kind of instill that sense of overwhelming or anxiety. Yeah. Alright, now for the ship warp and the ship cutting scenes. To be completely honest, there wasn't much inspiration behind these. It just kind of, I wanted the ship to come in, and I wanted the ship to get cut. That was pretty much just what I wanted, so I just really was trial and error. Like, I did probably like 5 different ways the ship could warp in right here, or the DSSS, and this is what I ended up falling on, and this ended up being the most simple too. But this is actually an extremely simple shader setup for this entire effect. Literally just a gradient texture with a sphere, so it's literally just a sphere that I squashed and then applied in the midst of texture that gets brighter over time. That's quite literally it. And then I have the ship literally just like appear, like it's I make it invisible and then it appears, and then I have this gradient of emission on it, just kind of look like it is almost like red hot, but like warp hot. I don't know if that makes sense. And then the texture, like the DSSS in the game actually doesn't really have any texturing on it at all. So this is just a quick map that I generated a few years ago in a software called JS Placement. I made just a few maps and then deleted the software because I was like, oh, this isn't even that good. But then I ended up using all these maps years later. I'm like, oh, it's kind of good. But yeah, that scene, it's funny because I actually didn't expect that scene to be a lot of people's favorites, but it apparently was, because a lot of people kept asking how I did it, or just like why it looked so good, and there really isn't much to it. for all the eagles flying out the bottom, it's actually hilarious because, I mean, there's a rule where if you don't, or if they're not going to see it, don't put much work into it. And that holds extremely true here because, well, one, these aren't eagles. They're extremely simple, low poly, not even the correct color for an eagle, like plain looking thing. And I think the funniest part, in my opinion, is I didn't even bother to orient them correctly. Like, most of these are on their side. Like, but, you know, like, it doesn't matter because you are super far away. Unless you, like, really zoom in, it doesn't matter. And even when you do, kind of, it still looks okay. But how I did this is I just made a particle system with an emitter, set it to emit just from this ring at the bottom of the DSS, and then put a force field in the middle of that ring so that they all kind of fly outwards. And it really was kind of just that simple. I think I might have even like turned gravity off and then put a force field up here so that they only go down a little bit. But yeah. And then for the missiles, you probably could have guessed, but it is just a sphere riding along a curve with a simple like smoke plane that I made, which is just a gradient sphere with, like, it's a, in the shader editor, it's just a sphere with a noise texture kind of mapping over it. There's tons of YouTube videos on how to make a smoke image plane if you want to figure out how to do that for yourself. But yeah, I have a wind force blowing under it so the smoke flies up as well. Then I turn that orb off once it gets to this point, and then turn these ones on in the view, or like in the render view and viewport. Then they fly, and then the explosions hit. Bam. And this is another instance of the PNG sequence, and it's funny because, like, from the wrong point of view, this looks downright diabolical. Like, it does not look correct at all. But in the viewport, like, or in the camera view, like, it's not even that bad. But one problem you will, without that, run into if you're doing PNG sequence or videos of explosions is the shadows, because the sun is over here. This won't cast a shadow properly, and you can see that. Like, it, if I turn their shadows on, it doesn't really cast almost any shadow because it's a plane and it's angled directly perpendicular to the sun, or aligned with the sun. So how you get around that is you have all the explosions that are visible to the camera, you turn off their shadow ray visibility in the object properties so that this doesn't cast any shadow. And you're like, well, how does that help? Now we have no shadows. Well, you duplicate that same explosion and then you turn that one off to the camera view. So you have the same explosion, turn it off to the camera view so it's only casting a shadow. And now what's really handy is you can turn that so that it is facing the sun, and now you can kind of control the shadow. So it'll still be the same animation, so it kind of looks like that, like if I advance forward, you can see like it's still moving along with that explosion, but it is casting the shadow how it would actually kind of look if it was a real volume. Because volumes in Eevee can't even cast out the shadows themselves, so even if I am using a real volume for the explosion, I still have to do this method where I render it out as a PNG sequence and then use that as a shadow catcher. Or not a shadow catcher, just a shadow emitter, I guess. And then this is the same explosion over and over, squish and squash different ways, put in different angles. I adjust their brightness on some just to make them look different, but they are totally all the exact same explosion. And even though it's definitely not perfect, I think it works. And another reason I had to do that is because when I was first making the scene, I didn't have the forethought to think about how Eevee handles volume. So initially I was going to have all these be real volume explosions, right? And that's like, oh, cool, great, dandy. But the problem is I have clouds kind of in front of the camera, and that drop pod also has that smoke kind of coming off of it. You can't really see it right here. But Eevee is pretty good at rendering volumetrics, but it struggles to render them efficiently when in two different spots. So like if all your volumes are kind of next to each other and the same distance for the camera, that's great. But you can see here there is a range that you set for Eevee. And if I want them to, like the volumes to be rendered really well, super far away, and super well really up close, you just can't do that. If you wanted to do that, you would have to set up two different view layers and render them separately and composite them at the end, which is a super viable thing and what you should do. But I didn't have the forethought to do that, and at this point when I start adding these kind of things, I was starting to get towards the end of the timeline I set for myself. So I was like, all right, we're going to kind of just do this instead, because it still kind of works. It doesn't look as good, but it's what we had to do. And then scrolling over to the actual ship cutting, it is, as you probably could have guessed, there is just a plane with a noise, once again, scrolling noise texture on it to kind of give it some, texture. It is quite literally just passing through the ship. We have yet another scrolling noise texture, if I can grab it right here, that I just hand animated to kind of follow the bottom, but it doesn't even follow it very well, but you can't tell because it's so bright that it works. So yeah, I literally just, I rotate it, like animate the rotation so it looks like it's cutting through. And to add some extra pizzazz, I have a vertex group that I use to drive like a noise emission along that area. Let's see if I can actually find it. Yeah, so you see you have the color attribute. I set these vertices to the glow group, I guess you could say. And then just use that to control this emission and then just make it animate. Did I actually even... Look at that, I didn't even do it properly. That's how jerry-rigged a lot of this stuff is. Yeah, I didn't even follow the laser properly. That's hilarious. But yeah, just animate it going kind of across, and that was that. And then the explosion was, once again, a PNG sequence. Because when you're doing a one take like this, it's also much easier to have everything be this because it's much lighter on the scene. And because the camera is moving so much around this, if I just have it stay right here, it will look weird as the camera starts to go further, like down. So what I actually had to do is animate its position and rotation, so it's always kind of in between the camera and this point, so it looks like it's actually an explosion coming from that. And I think it worked pretty well. Even though the explosion itself doesn't look phenomenal, it still works okay. And the explosion was made, this one was made in Embergen, but rendered in cycles in a separate scene. Then I turn it into an image sequence, bring it over here. Yeah. And for the sounds of the ship warping in, one of the effects, or like sound effects I used a lot was thunder. For some reason, if you just kind of put thunder on things, it kind of, I mean, it doesn't work a lot of times, but other times it works like really well. So let me play it and you'll kind of hear what I mean. Like, those aren't even that good of sound effects. It's actually pretty funny. But with the anticipation that was made, like, in the visuals, I think it is okay. Especially with the swell in the music. At that moment, you really can't tell what's going on. But there's kind of this, yeah, thunderstorm rumble. And it's so loud that it actually gets, like, distorted. Like, it's really not done super well. But in combination with all the other things happening right then, it works okay. And then I actually was really proud of how I did these, like the spiral rockets, how they sound, because it's actually like bottle rockets going off in combination to pretty much the same explosion sound happening a handful of different times. So let's see, let's hear that. Actually, let's do that. Like, it sounds really satisfying, to me at least. But it's just like fire, or yeah, underwater rocket. That's not even underwater. It's a bottle rocket. And then like just some whoosh sounds, a synth, bass drop, all these things just to give it like just overlaying a bunch of different sounds sometimes works. And and just listening to various reference audio from like Star Wars or Halo or just random other sci-fi things can be really helpful. And for all these sound effects, I went through so much trial and tribulation trying out a bunch of different things, and honestly, it just took time and kind of just guessing. That's what it really came down to. Yeah, and then for the laser, people really liked how that sound. So this is another Brom sound effect. It's so funny to say Brom. So the Brom sounds like this. And like that sounds pretty kick-ass by itself. And then we have an impact. Let's see. That's the same thing. Okay, impact. Just kind of give it some forward sound. And that is honestly, I feel like, one of the things that sounds really cool. It's an energy beam sound effect from Artlist that I pitched down. So like, here's what it sounds like normally. Which, that's great, but it's kind of a strain on the ears, so I'm like, what if I make it sound more epic by turning down this amazing slider? And like, well, I'll be damned, it worked. And then we also have ship itself breaking. Oh, hello there. Let's see. Yeah, collapsing metal beams breaking sound effect. And then, I mean, yeah, you can see there is just a lot of layered sound effects. I brought that wooden creaking ship sound effect back again. Another Brom thrown on top of all of it. Just, I mean, this is going to be another moment where it's supposed to be overwhelming. Just sounds that are almost so loud that you can't comprehend them. And I feel like it did that. Yeah. And here we have the city scene. So the purpose of this was obviously kind of to show what's at stake, and also to show that, ship is falling onto the city. And I mean, I guess I'll just kind of... Oh, the inspiration for like the overall look of this was obviously from the Helldivers 2 trailer, where it showed this city where it's mostly white buildings that don't have a lot of texture on them, and then these sci-fi urban or like suburban houses. These I did hand make. If you want them for yourself, they are on my Patreon. But I just kind of modeled based off of how they looked in the trailer, just took some screenshots and modeled kind of to look like it. And then the trees and grass are from Botanic. And yeah, I just kind of tried to make everything look as close to the trailer as I could, so it almost looks like it's the same city. The city over here, I made a geometry nodes city generator. Really, really simple. Honestly, you can't even tell that it's not just a simple scattering. But there was supposed to be like a Voronoi texture kind of making like almost road shapes, but it didn't even end up looking like it did. But these are just some buildings that I bought from ArtStation for like $4 and threw texture on them with buildings, but it's only controlling the emissiveness. Ian Hubert, if you watch his How to Make a City tutorial, it's basically the same method. Super easy, super simple, almost feels like cheating. And then there wasn't really a reason that I made the camera starting in the puddle. I kind of just always wanted the camera to be doing something interesting, because nothing drives, or nothing, you can kind of almost ruin a shot if the camera is doing something, or doing nothing, really. You can have the best scene ever, but if the camera work is just kind of lame and uninteresting, then it kind of just not ruins it, but it makes it not nearly as good. So the clouds kind of made everything look rainy, so I was like, oh, what if I put puddles on the ground? I was like, oh, what if the camera starts in the puddles? So like, because I wanted the city to be this big reveal So I'm like, okay, well, I'll start here. You'll see the pod, and it's like, oh yeah, that's totally a city. Oh, we might be heading for a city. And I look up, and it's like, oh, it's a neighborhood. Oh, you look at that, there's cars, there's people, oh my goodness. And then you look up, and you're like, oh shit, it's a city. And you look even further up, and the building, or the ship is falling through the clouds, and it's obviously going to crush everything. So I wanted to, I guess, yeah, the motivation for that was kind of just setting up the reveal of the city and what's at stake. So for this scene, the purpose was obviously another just point A to point B kind of shot. I just wanted to show the pod entering the atmosphere and to kind of have a transition from space to the ground. And the inspiration, as you probably could have seen, was the Halo 2 drop pod scene when it's kind of going through the clouds. It's not a one-to-one, but I did kind of take some tips from that, like making these streaks come off the side of the pod, which is just another scrolling noise texture plane. But one problem I was encountering, not just here, but really in all of the Blender work I've done, is Eevee kind of sucks when it comes, like, it's good at most volumetrics, but for some reason clouds are just, it does not do well. So for this scene, you can see here's the good old Eevee clouds. Like, they're kind of not good. They're not great. Pretty rough. But then I was like, you know what if I just get pictures of clouds and I kind of put it behind the Eevee clouds, and like, surely that won't work. And then I put them in, and I'm like, oh my god, they kind of work. It's like when it's looking up, I feel like just seeing the edges that are created by the PNGs of the clouds make it be like, oh yes, these are clouds. And then the Eevee volumes can almost be like the misty parts, if that makes sense. I don't know. I don't really know exactly why it works, but it works. Just putting pictures of clouds next to the fake clouds makes you, like, it's like the transitive property where it's like, oh yes, now this is all clouds. Yeah. So for the scene, probably the biggest inspiration I took from the Halo 2 version, or like the version that I kind of referenced, was the sound effects, where it has this kind of edgy, very sci-fi feel to it. It's like, it definitely would not sound like that if it was actually falling through the sky, but it kind of, I don't know, just the edginess kind of works. And that's what I mean. Like, sometimes when you're making audio, you're like, I don't even know what to do here. Add some whooshes, like, it probably would make whooshes it's falling through the sky, right? And then you watch a video of someone else doing kind of a similar thing, and they do something, and it's like, whoa, who knew that adding all these sci-fi or like just kind of weird random sounds work in this kind of scenario. So this is definitely one of those instances where I heavily referenced the audio reference. And here we have the building destruction in this scene. So you could totally do this with rigid body simulations. But I tried that, and I tried for like a solid 2 days. And it just was not working. Like, I tried to make it breakable so that like it would snap, and honestly, I don't know if it was the buildings I used, because obviously these aren't made to be destroyed, or I'm just bad at simulations, or my computer would sometimes kill itself when I was trying to do them. It just didn't work. So I was like, you know what, particles can collide with things. So these are actually, all these pieces are, I used the quick explode that Blender has, which if you don't know how to do that, you go into Object, Quick Effects, and then Quick Explode, and it just turns whatever you selected into particles that just fall apart. I did that, and I put a solidify modifier on them so they still look like they have some depth, and then made it so that this is a collider. And I made it so the particles themselves don't actually move. Like, there's not even gravity. I turned off gravity for them so that the only time they'll move is if this smacks into them. And I feel like that works because since the scale is so huge, it's not like these would be moving that much faster down anyways, I feel like, with terminal velocity. So I was like, no way is this gonna work, and I simulated it, and it worked. I feel like that's something I did a lot in this film, where I'm like, oh, this is definitely not gonna work, and then it works, because it really was just trial and error. So this definitely won't work for a lot of things, but since this scene, like, it's kind of covered with smoke, and like you can barely, and it's covered with other buildings, and it's kind of obscured anyways, it does work. And there were some people asking, hey, why is the, ship just falling straight down? Like, that looks kind of weird. And to be honest, it was because I simulated this, and I'm like, oh my gosh, hooray, I finally did it after 2 days of work. I put it in the scene, I rendered it, and I did all the stuff, and then forgot about it, and I'm like, I came back to it weeks later, and I'm like, oh my goodness, it didn't, like, it looks kind of funny, it should be moving, but I'm like, I don't want to fix it. So it is how it is. And, like, perfection is the enemy of getting shit done. So I just wanted to call it good. But here, the smoke, all the smoke here is done in Blender. This smoke up here is actually also done in Davinci. If you didn't know, Davinci has a pretty sophisticated like particle emitting system. I'm not going to go into that because it's kind of a whole can of worms. But I just kind of made like a shape fall down the screen, and it's emitting these smoke particles. Did all the color grading afterwards, so it looked like the rest of the smoke. Just because the smoke that Blender made it wasn't looking quite right. So did that. The explosion, you probably could have guessed, is done in Embergen. It's a modification of the gasoline explosion preset. Whenever I'm doing explosions in Embergen, I usually start with one of their presets that looks like a similar scale or vibe that I'm going for, and then adjust it to fit my specific needs. But a lot of the heavy lifting, I feel like, is actually done in comp. Adjusting like making everything dark, lowering the exposure, and then adding these light rays, and I even masked out the house so you like the light rays look like they're coming from out there. Because when I first rendered it, it looked pretty darn bad. You can actually no, that won't show how bad it looked. But it looked pretty rough. But by adding more and more stuff, it kind of helped. And also, these buildings are a different shader than the rest of them. As soon as they start getting destroyed, I just turn the emission off. That's how the lights turned off to the person who had that question. And then the same deal that I used on these buildings to break them by doing the quick explode and then having them like get knocked by a collider is kind of the same way that I did these buildings exploding. If you notice, not all of the buildings actually get knocked back. It's only like this one and like a few others just in the foreground. Because the smoke obscures all of them pretty quick, so I knew I didn't have to do a ton of stuff. I couldn't even get the rotation to work on the particle simulation, so if you notice, they don't rotate. They just kind of like, boom. So yeah, they just get thrown back using quick explode and just using a force field to push them back a little bit, just to add a bit more collateral. And yeah. For the sound effects, this was another instance where I did utilize like delaying because I wanted to convince the sense of scale and kind of keep you waiting in anticipation. So, let's see. Let's see what this sounds like. So you probably could have told, or could tell, that sound at the end is the ICBM missile ripped straight from the game, just because it sounds cool, and anything I can use to kind of tie it back to the game I used. But all the explosions are just explosion echoes from Artlist, and you just, make them delay, delayed, and I don't know, it just kind of works. So the logo scene was done entirely in Blender, just using some simple shapes, and then I applied a nice texture, like metal texture to everything, and then use like very specific lighting to kind of make that metal look on it. just look how I wanted, if that makes sense. But you might be wondering, how did he do the crack? That's kind of cool looking, right? So that was done through sheer perseverance. So I manually used a knife tool and cut. I just made a few cuts in all these spots, and then when the drop pod goes through the skull, all of these force fields, they're all like the same force field. I just put in different areas to kind of dial things in, and they all have a fall off. Actually, those aren't the force fields. What am I talking about? There's somewhere around here. They all have a fall off, so once the shrapnel pieces get so far away from them, they stop moving, so it kind of gives that almost slow motion stop. Like you can see, they move, and then they slow down. And then I have a wind force that keeps them moving a very small amount once they're outside of the boundaries of the initial push. But I feel like it was really just luck and trying over and over to kind of get that simulation to work how I wanted. And it is a completely flat plane. And then for the sound effects here, I did some cracking ice sounds just because I didn't know, how do you make the sound of metal cracking? I don't feel like that's really a thing. So I'm like, what cracks? Ice. Yeah, that works. So you have that. Let's see. That's the crack, and then I guess it isn't cracking, it's wood shards falling, whatever that means. And then, of course, the brom and just explosion, I think? Yeah. And altogether, that makes that really cool. Oh, and with a thunderstorm over all of it, of course, you have this. And that sounds pretty cool. There wasn't really an inspiration behind the logo itself or the sounds, I'll have to say. But really, I just wanted it to be I take something from Helldivers, which is the logo, which is super identifiable, and then I do something dramatic and interesting with it, like breaking it. So the last scene I really wanted to talk about was this finale, the Stridor. So the purpose of this scene and the few scenes before it were to kind of show the havoc that that was had on the ground of Super Earth, and to kind of just make it have a dramatic closure. Initially, I actually was gonna just have the pod land, and then the camera's over the pod, then the cap pops off, and that's kind of it. But about 3 days prior to the release of the film, I'm like, no, that looks terrible. I can't end it off like that. And I proceeded to make all of the ground shots. That includes everything from the cap popping off the pod to the end. All of that was made in the last 3 days. I was even working those days. I just had to stay up. But so this scene was actually deceptively simple. Literally just the factory Stridor taken from the Helldivers archive, and then these are all free VDBs that Embergen has for free on their website. You can just download them. I scatter them around, scale them, turn them so that they're doing different things. Put a light back here just to give them some more variety. Oh, okay, we're spinning now. Cool. Of course, here's the ground from the buildings, but without the buildings because they are destroyed. And I mean, yeah, it was actually a really simple scene to pull off, but you might notice this does not look nearly as, it looks okay, don't get me wrong, but it doesn't look quite as good as the finale. And that is another instance where Davinci Resolve did some heavy legwork here. It's really, one of my favorite features, I'm sure this is a feature and everything, but it's just so easy here, is the your ability to mask things out really easily. Or not just mask, but draw gradients and stuff super easily. So, I'm just going to break this down kind of piece by piece. So initially I start off with dropping the exposure on different spots. It almost looks like a light shaft coming down this way just to give more angled, interesting lighting. It almost gives Expedition 33 kind of style vibes. And then I made his feet darker, I guess just to add some contrast. And then here I upped the exposure by a ton, and then not there. Up the exposure by a ton, and then increased the contrast by a ton, and it made it so that this otherwise very muted sides suddenly became very punchy and dramatic, but still made it so the center is like muted all around him, so that the Stridor still remains the center of focus within this entire, or I guess I should say this part of the frame. And then adjusted the colors to be more red because automatons, added some lens reflections, added this node, which this, I haven't even talked about this enough. This node single-handedly is, I mean, it just carries everything. It's the Film Look Creator node. It adds a bunch of effects that you would probably add otherwise, like halation, bloom, grain, but it does it and dials it in pretty nicely automatically. So you would see, normally this would be, like this red is incredibly oversaturated. It looks funny. And that's not really how light works. But when you add the Film Look Creator, it kind of is like, oh yes, that red would not actually be that red. It would just be a little brighter. And I'm like, yes, that looks right. And it kind of just ties it. It really does just tie everything together. It can kind of make a scene that looks very CGI or very kind of beginner and turn it to something much cleaner. And then I just did some touching up of the colors and highlights at the end there. I mean, just goes to show, though, that Davinci Resolve really can bring that, you can have a raw render look terrible, and then you bring it into Davinci and really make things a lot nicer. The sound effects here were a lot of them were actually straight from the game, like the automaton chant. It's funny, the sound I used for like it walking were actually the TCS, or like the bug sprayer thing in the game activating. So here's what that sounds like, because it just sounds so gosh darn cool. The sound design team at Arrowhead really knocked it out of the park, and that's why I use so many of their sound effects, but here it is. Like, it's just so good. I had to use it. And then the other sounds I have here are just like the footsteps. This is just from Artlist as well. And just other, I mean, I have the Stridor doing its like yell thing. The Stratagem activation sound at the end. A lot of these really are just straight from the game itself, with just a few added ambiance things from Artlist, like the footsteps and whatnot. Yeah.